tune up some of the volume and those kind of things, we'll be able to share it on our YouTube channel and on Twitter as well. So if you missed any of our previous Lunch and Learn, you'll be able to find those there soon. So thank you for that. And next, so we're celebrating the celebration of Diwali, which is the day of Diwali is actually November 14th, but it's a 5-day celebration celebrating the victory of good over evil, light over darkness. And several student organizations associated with the South Asian and South Asian American communities have decorated the arc for the celebration. So you can stop by today through Friday, today and tomorrow, or Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And while supplies last, the student orgs are providing free Diwali boxes filled with snacks and other items as well. So I would really encourage you to, if you get a chance, to stop by the Arc to see the decorations and learn more about Diwali as well. So a little bit about next semester, things to look forward to. All right, sorry, real quick. For after this Lunch and Learn, this is our last Lunch and Learn of the series or the semester, but we will be continuing with our reality program until the end of the semester. So those are held on Wednesdays from 1 to 2 p.m. And our CAPS liaison will be having opportunities for students to talk if you would like. They can be kind of one-on-one conversations, or if you're comfortable with having others as part of the group, that's more than welcome as well. So that's Wednesdays from 1 to 2 on the Zoom platform. And next, Lunch and Learn for the spring. So here are a couple people who have agreed to speak with us for next semester. We have several topics, including what solidarity means for the next 4 years of the presidency, food trucks and research, how Central Asian women in the US worked on COVID awareness raising in Central Asia, and also virtual identities and music as well. And there's also several more that are in the works. So we're looking forward to be able to share that with you all in the upcoming semester. So that's it for right now. All those information will be available on our website and social media as we move forward with the semester and final plannings. So without further ado, today I'd like to thank Risa Taua, who is willing to present for us today. So Risa, turning it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Ooh, wrong one. Okay. Thank you for that introduction again. For those who are not aware, well, I'll share that. So today my presentation is basically going to cover a broad title or a general topic on Asian and Pacific Island American communities. However, specifically, I'll be talking more from a Samoan perspective or within the Samoan communities. Okay, so my name is Nerisa Taua, however I go by Risa for short. My pronouns are she and her. I identify as a Pacific Islander, specifically Samoan, and I am currently at my last semester as an MS student in Wildlife Science with the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Before I go in to talk more about the Samoan community, I want to share a little background about myself, and this also sort of ties into where I come from, or ties into American Samoa. So looking at the map of American Samoa, which is where I'm originally from, of course, it's often confused with the independent country of Samoa, but there's going to be another slide for the presentation where I talk more about the differences between these two countries. So American Samoa is a US territory located in the South Pacific. It's about a 5-hour flight south of Hawaii. It's made up of 7 islands and atoll. However, nobody lives on Rose Atoll. Looking closely at the map of American Samoa, I am originally from the island of Taua, which is the one you see on this bottom right corner here. And Taua is part of the Manua group, which is these 3 islands all together. I am specifically from the village of Fitiuta Manua, and it looks exactly as what you see in that picture up there, the right top corner. It's a very small village, probably like 200 to 300 population people that live there, and basically everything's located on the shore, but it's a very, very beautiful place. Unfortunately, in 2004, we experienced a devastating hurricane that pretty much damaged all the houses and the trees and the wildlife in Ta'u. And this eventually led to my family and I having to move to the main island of American Samoa, which is Tutuila, this big one right here. And so we currently reside in the village of Waitongi. Fun fact, Waitongi is known for the turtle and shark legend. Basically what happens is, as you see in the picture there, villagers would bring in guests or tourists or anyone who is interested, and they would stand on that cliff and they would sing a specific song. And with that song, a turtle and a shark would merge from the water. And there's a whole legend behind to why this happens. Little background on my education. I graduated from Chaminade University of Honolulu, Hawaii with my Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and a minor in English. This picture is exactly what it is like to be Polynesian and graduating. It's just suffocating with lots and lots and all sorts of leis. If you're interested in learning about leis, the NACC does Aloha Fridays where we get to make candy leis. So if you're interested on leis and stuff like that, the NACC is definitely the place to be. So now I'm currently a grad student at Purdue University pursuing my master's in wildlife science in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, as I mentioned before. And I get to do bat research, and I do some research with the Midwest bats found here in Indiana. However, my thesis focuses on the Tongan flying foxes back home in American Samoa. So just a fair warning as I share more information to you guys about American Samoa or the Samoan community. I am not an expert in Samoan history, Samoan language, or anything that I'm talking about right now. Most of the information that I'm sharing with you guys are from personal experiences and are from information that I've learned throughout going to school in American Samoa. So as I mentioned before, the Samoan Islands, of course, is made up of American Samoa and Samoa. So the difference between the two, so before we go into the differences and the similarity, American Samoa, as I mentioned before, is made up of 7 islands and atoll, which includes Onu'u, Ofu, Olosenga, Rose Atoll, Swains Island, Tutuila, and Ta'u. So Tutuila is where I currently live, and Ta'u is where I'm originally from. And then the Samoa, which is the independent country, is made up of Upolu, Savaii, Manono, Apolima, Vanuatu, Naumua, Nu'upola, Nu'ulua, Nu'usafe'e, and Nu'utele. So all the islands that start with N are the ones where nobody lives on. So now going into the similarities and the differences between the two countries. So American Samoa, again, is a US territory and Samoa is an independent country. And basically just by looking at that, you can sort of tell what kind of government they have. So of course, American Samoa is a democracy and Samoa, however, instead of a president, we just have a governor and a lieutenant governor. Samoa is parliamentary. Instead of a president, they have a prime minister. And then again, you can also see the size of these islands. The population in American Samoa is only 55,500. And then the population in the independent Samoa is about 200,000. So you can already tell that the independent Samoa is much larger in terms of geographic region. And you can also sort of see which country struggles with poverty a lot. Despite the differences between the two countries, they are still similar. They still have the same language, culture, traditions, and geographic region features in terms of landscapes, wildlife habitat, wildlife animals, and stuff like that. So despite the differences in their population and their government, they still have the same language, culture, and traditions. However, with my talk, I'm going to talk more about American Samoa, which is where I am from and was raised my whole life. Fun fact, I've actually never been to the independent country of Samoa, so I can't really say much about that. So some of you guys are probably wondering how did the Samoan Islands come in separation into two? So what happened was during the early 20th century in 1899, there was this thing called the Tripartite Convention. And basically this convention was created to come up with a solution or to mitigate an issue that was happening between Germany, US, and Britain when they were fighting over the Samoan Islands. So with this convention, what happened was Germany ended up claiming the western islands of Samoa, which is all the islands that are part of the independent Samoa. And then the US ended up claiming the eastern Samoan islands, which is what we know as American Samoa today. Britain didn't claim any parts of Samoan islands. They were fine with the fact that Germany would no longer claimed Tonga. I think there were other countries in West Africa as well. So Britain was fine with that. And since Germany no longer claimed Samoa and Britain since Germany claimed Samoa and Britain claimed Tonga, and so they basically took Tonga from Germany, they were fine with not having any parts in the Samoan Islands. And so basically that was how the separation between the two countries happened. Short history in American Samoa, sort of get an idea with the American colonization. So the US Navy took possession of American Samoa for the US government around the 1900s. Of course, American Samoa was still under the US government, but most of the control was within the US Navy. And the reason the US was so interested in American Samoa was because of the Pago Pago Bay, which is located in Tutuila. So once the US Naval took possession of American Samoa, well, during the time, American Samoa was only Tutuila. So they only gained possession of Tutuila because of the Pago Pago Bay, and they basically expanded the Pago Pago Bay throughout the whole island, and then they renamed Tutuila as the US Naval Station of Tutuila. Oh, go back, of Tutuila. So again, during that time, keep in mind that Manua wasn't part of American Samoa at the time. This was just with Tutuila. So once the US Navy secured Tutuila with the deed of cession during the 1900s, the islands of Manua saw how much of the benefits they were getting. There were jobs were coming up within the US Navy. They were bringing in imports from the US. They were creating a really good education system with the people of Tutuila. So once the High Chief in Manua saw that, they wanted to participate, which was where the deed of cession of Manua came about 4 years after the deed of cession of Tutuila. So once that happened, the US Naval Station Tutuila was no longer composed of just Tutuila. It now included the islands of Manua. So that's why in 1911, they changed the names of the islands from US Naval Station Tutuila to American Samoa so that Manua was included as well. So basically with all that information, the reason why US was so interested in American Samoa was because of this Pago Pago Bay. I also wanted to bring up an important history that happened in American Samoa, which was the 1918 pandemic flu. So I can sort of compare to what's going on in American Samoa in terms of the pandemic that's happening right now. So during the 1918 pandemic flu in American Samoa was one of the only places in the world with no deaths caused by the pandemic flu. And today with the coronavirus, American Samoa is the only US locale with no COVID cases. There were 3 COVID case scare last week. However, it was through a shipment cargo, a container cargo boat. However, nobody came off of that boat. No one was allowed to come off the boat. No one was allowed to unload anything from that boat. So the boat didn't really dock in American Samoa. So till today, there are still no COVID cases happening in American Samoa. And the reason why there were no pandemic flu cases in the 1918 and the reason there's no COVID cases today is because the governors during the time and the governor right now took action immediately as soon as these pandemic happened. So in 1918, the governor at the time issued quarantine boats from the US. So that was a lot of help as soon as the pandemic happened. With the COVID, as soon as the COVID cases came into the US, the current governor closed the borders immediately. So no boats or planes that bring in people and stuff like that were allowed to travel in and out of American Samoa. So until today, the borders in American Samoa are still closed. So I'm pretty much stuck out here. So going into American Samoa government, this is where a lot of questions come up, especially in terms of nationality. So I like to start off with land ownership because this is one of the important things within the American Samoa government and the reason why our government is structured the way it is. So in American Samoa, land ownership, about 90% of the land in American Samoa is communally owned by Aina, and Aina means family in American Samoa. So if you are Samoan and you were to go buy land from someone else, you'd have to go through the whole family. Like you'd have to ask every family member and make sure that they're okay with it, especially the chiefs of the family. So also, in order for you to own land in American Samoa, you have to be 50% or more Samoan. And we don't have any specific identification, like you don't have a card with you that tells you that you're Samoan or whatnot. But in order for you to prove that you are Samoan, you have to go through this office called Office of Samoan Affairs, which we'll talk about later. And basically what you do is just look for your family genealogy and records and stuff like that to prove that you are a descendant of Samoa. So the American Samoa is known as an unincorporated territory. And the reason for that is because the US Constitution applies only partially. American Samoa has their own constitution. Another reason is because the absence of an organic law. And basically with the organic law, if American Samoa was to have the organic law, the US gets to tell us what to do with our lands, gets to tell us how to do or how to form our government and stuff like that. So we won't have much say in the stuff that we do. Another reason we're called unincorporated is because of the structure of our judicial branch. Instead of a high Supreme Court, we have a High Court of American Samoa, and they work a lot with the Office of Samoan Affairs, which I mentioned earlier. And the reason these guys stand out the most is because they deal a lot with Samoan affairs in terms of family lands. If there's a family fighting over a land, trying to figure out who owns which land, this is where the High Court of American Samoa and Samoan affairs come up, or even chief titles. There's a lot of arguments that happen with chief titles as well. And so they handle a lot of cases like that. Another reason we're unincorporated is because of the structure of our fono, which is basically the legislative branch. So we do have representatives, about 1 to 3, depending on the size of the district, and our representatives are elected by the people. However, our senators are elected by the chiefly system. So instead of being elected by the people, senators are elected by the chiefs of the district. So in one district is made up of 2 or more villages. So every high chief from these villages would elect a chief to become a senator of their district. So in order for you to become a senator, you have to be a chief, and you are also elected by chiefs in that district. Okay. Okay. And the next one is, okay, so American Samoa nationality. This is where a lot of the questions come. So under the Immigration and Nationality Act, if you're born in American Samoa, you're considered a US national, not a US citizen. And there have been some cases come up where people in American Samoa would want to become US citizens. Some of the cons that come up as a US national is that you have limited opportunities. A lot of students or Samoan scholars would try to apply for certain scholarships, but they're unable to because they're US nationals, not US citizens. Some people would try to apply for jobs like the police department, but they're unable to because they're considered US nationals. Another con of US nationals is that you cannot participate in presidential election, and you can't even run for a US office as well. However, with that cons of being a US national also comes the cons of being a US citizen in American Samoa. And those cons include the organic law enacted. So if American Samoa were to have the organic law, who knows if we'd still have say in how we control or own our land, how we form our government, and how we still include our culture in our government and education system. And with that being said, basically the Fa Samoa would be lost. And Fa Samoa means the way of Samoa. So basically our culture and traditions will probably get lost along the way if we were to become US citizens. So following that, one of the famous court cases that was brought up to the US Supreme Court was called the Taua versus the United States of America. Basically, this man, his name is Lenny for short, he tried to apply for a police department in California, but was unable to because he is a US national. So basically, he brought this up to the district court, and then the district court brought it up to the Supreme Court, but they denied review. So it's still not resolved until today. But basically what this man wanted to do was he wanted people born in American Samoa to be known as US citizens. And just recently, a similar case happened in 2019 where someone in Utah brought up a similar case, and the federal court in Utah ruled that American Samoa should be US citizens. And this upset a lot of people who were raised in American Samoa and who were brought up in the American Samoa culture and stuff like that. Because again, what people don't understand is that once we become US citizens, and you can look at Guam, for example. Guam became US citizens. They still can't participate in presidential elections, and they pretty much lost majority of their land to the US military. And so that is one thing that we do not want to happen in American Samoa, because if we were to have the organic law, our culture will no longer be embedded in our government. Who knows if we'll still have an American Samoa constitution, and we'll probably not even still require students to take Samoan classes in every grade until college, because that's one of the things that they do in American Samoa to keep the culture going, is that no matter what grade you're in, you have to take a Samoan class. The American Samoa culture, today the American Samoan language is still being spoken. Again, as I said, when you go to school in American Samoa, every grade from kindergarten to 12th grade, even in community college in American Samoa, you have to take a Samoan class. So the Samoan language is still being spoken. The chiefly system is still alive in American Samoa. Every family has a chief, every village has a chief and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, our senators are still practicing the chiefly election system. Samoan ceremonies for specific events like funerals, weddings, graduations even, are still being practiced today as well. However, being a US territory, of course, we also get Western influences. So within, as time has modernized, American Samoa culture has changed with time as well. Christianity has become a huge pillar in the Samoan culture. If you were to ride around in American Samoa, there are like 3 to 4 different churches in every village you see. The military has also become a huge thing in American Samoa. As a matter of fact, American Samoa is known as the #1 exporter of US soldiers. This picture you see here was the largest group the US military has ever brought in from American Samoa. So this was like 41 people who swore in the US Army. Other influences, we had influence in our music. We have influence from hip hop, rap, and reggae. There's not that much representation of Samoans in media, so we tend to look for representations from other culture, like Black culture, Asian cultures, and stuff like that. And so that's where most of our influences come from in terms of arts. Sports is another huge thing. From different countries, football, especially the NFL. Every time I introduce myself, I like to say I'm from the #1 exporter of NFL football players per capita, of course. Oh yeah, this was at hip hop. This was one of the famous hip hop Samoan groups in the West Coast. But yes, sports, Troy Polamalu, I don't know if you guys know him. So there are definitely a lot of Samoans who play for the NFL football today. As a matter of fact, I graduated with some of them in high school, but that doesn't make me famous. Soccer and rugby as well, influences from other countries in sports. And so yeah, these are definitely huge sports that in American Samoa that we have learned from other countries. The American Samoa wildlife, this is just a short one, and I'll be speaking from something that I am more knowledgeable in. So American Samoa is very diverse in wildlife in terms of birds, plants and trees, and ocean wildlife, marine wildlife, and stuff like that. But I will be talking to you guys about the terrestrial wildlife in American Samoa because it's what I study. So in American Samoa, there are only 3 native terrestrial mammals, and they are all bats. So we have the Samoan flying fox, we have the Tongan flying fox, which is the one that I research. And then we have a non-flying fox species which is the Pacific she-tailed bat. Now, these are the only firm native mammals that you can find in American Samoa. And The first two ones are fruit-eating bats and are much larger in size. And the last one right here is an insect-eating bat, which is really small. Now, the importance of these bats is that not only do they play roles in the legends and myths in American Samoa, but they're also important for pollination and seed dispersal. So basically what bees and birds do are what bats do as well. And through these services that they provide, they're basically regenerating the native forests in American Samoa. And culturally speaking, these are some of the trees that benefit from that seed dispersal and pollination, and they're also used to create Samoan artifacts and cuisines. Unfortunately, even though these bats are important within the ecosystem of American Samoa, they're experiencing a population decline due to overharvest, habitat loss, and natural disasters. Now that climate change has been happening a lot of natural disasters have been going on in American Samoa. As a matter of fact, 2 months ago, they experienced like 2 cyclones within 1 week. So it's been getting crazy. And so an example is during the 1990s, the Tongan flying foxes experienced like a 80% population decline due to 2 hurricanes that happened during the time. And so that is why me and the Department of Marine and Wildlife in American Samoa are currently doing a research program where we use GPS tags to understand the Samoan and Tongan flying fox movement and ecology, so that we get to save bats and so that they can continue growing trees and plants for us. So in conclusion, American Samoa, even though there have been some Western influences in our culture, we still do practice our language, our cultures, and our traditions as well. Despite the main issue of US citizenship coming up a couple of times, the people of American Samoa always choose their culture, to preserving their culture over anything else, which is why they're pretty much fine with being US nationals. And yeah. Any questions? And I also included my email there as well if anybody has any questions later on.
Thank you so much for presenting, Risa. It looks like we have a question in the chat a little earlier asking how many districts are there in the American Samoa?
There are 12 districts in American Samoa. Okay, sorry, I was just looking at see if there were any other questions. Is there a concern for? There is no concern for white nose syndrome in American Samoa. Even the bats in American Samoa don't have rabies. There haven't been any rabies cases. So yeah, there's definitely no white nose syndrome. Thank goodness. Oh, and for those who are not familiar, white nose syndrome is sort of like a disease that's been killing a lot of the bats here in the US.
Risa, I have a question.
Yes.
You spoke earlier to us before the event starts that you are defending in a couple weeks, and so excited about that. And I'm wondering, where has it been taking you, and what do you hope to get out of this work that you are currently doing?
Yeah, so my research has definitely given me the opportunity to give back to my community pretty much. So even though I'm out here taking classes, I get to go back home and conduct research with the wildlife back home, especially because that's something we lack in. We don't have data available for in terms of wildlife or anything within the STEM field in American Samoa. And so another thing that my research has allowed me to do is help my community in terms of wind turbine farms. So just recently, the US passed a regulation where the US territories will start using renewable energy. So there's been a plan introduced in American Samoa where they're going to put up wind turbines. And with my research, we're able to figure out which areas are good for wind turbines, because it's also known to kill bats and birds, and which areas shouldn't have wind turbines.
I have a question.
Yes.
what's the general feeling among like the people of the American Samoa about like the U.S. mainland? Is it like positive or is it like negative?
I guess it depends on who you ask. I mean, it's definitely positive to other people in terms of like, we come out here for opportunities like education, jobs, careers, and stuff like that. So it's definitely positive in you know, that perspective. But there are other people who don't have that positive perspective, and a lot of arguments that come up is the, you know, the U.S. citizenship and U.S. nationality issue. Another one is the fact that we're not allowed to, with the citizenship, like we have a lot of people coming in the US military, but yet they're still known as US nationals and stuff like that. Another is colonization. Of course, a lot of that has been happening. And now that we have scholars going out there, bringing back, researching stuff that happened in history and finding out the truth of what really happened, there's definitely some negative perspectives from that as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, Risa. Thank you for your presentation. I was curious when you're talking about the wind turbines and your research on bats. I guess, you know, I know very little about kahuku in Oahu in Hawaii. And I know there's been some discussion of wind turbines and bats there. And I'm wondering kind of if your research has a wider and Pacific Islander, I guess, reach. Like, are you working with other islands or communities that are having similar struggles?
Currently, right now, I'm only working with American Samoa, but it's definitely a plan to expand in terms of helping other countries, I mean, other islands in the Pacific. And the hard part of when you're trying to do that is that you can't really generalize much information you get from my research because, so I'm studying the flying foxes, and a lot of the bats in Hawaii that have been negatively impacted from these wind turbines are the hoary bats, the Hawaiian hoary bats. And so they're much more smaller than the Tongan flying foxes. So a lot of my information is based on the Tongan flying foxes. And if I were to generalize that, it probably could help the islands in Hawaii, but at the same time, they would have to include some information with the type of bats they study and the type of landscapes they deal with. But it's definitely something that if someone wanted to help with the wind turbines in Hawaii, they could definitely look at our study and use some of the methods that we've done if they want to find answers and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely something that can help other islands in the Pacific. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Risa, I have a question.
Yes.
So I think one thing that brought us to you is through our collaboration with the NAACC, and Falika has been amazing. Hi, Falika, you're here. Falika and you and everyone at NAACC has been amazing in terms of thinking about the intersection of Asian American and Asian communities and Pacific Islander communities. So and obviously we don't want you to speak on behalf of everyone. That's just not possible. So from this perspective of Risa, how do you see yourself and your community in these intersections, and what do you wish Asian American communities would understand more about you and about your community?
Every time I do some events, even Manabu would probably attest to this. He was even asked this question as well. Someone asked us was like, what is the connection between, Pacific Islands and, the Asian community? Like, why is it that every time we do events, there's always the, Asian American and Pacific Island? Like, why are the two terms always together? And so one of the things that we talked about was how it's because within the Pacific Islands, the Asian American cultures are very much prominent. And so an example is that in American Samoa, most of the businesses are owned by Korean families. All the seamstresses, like a lot of the people who sew the traditional wares in American Samoa are from the Philippines. A lot of the restaurants in American Samoa are Chinese restaurants and stuff like that. So in terms of economy, the Asian community has helped American Samoa a lot. A lot of our imports are from the Asian communities, countries as well. We get a lot of our stuff from Korea, from Japan, and from New Zealand, another island or country outside of Asia and stuff like that. So like with the Pacific Island and the Asian community, coming from my own perspective, like there's definitely that merge between the two. Like even in the Hawaii culture, a lot of their dishes now kind of has like that Asian fusion in it. So an example, like when I were talking about how Hawaii, they have the musubis, like they have the spam musubi, which is made out of rice, seaweed, and the spam. And probably the only thing you can find in Hawaii is the seaweed. And so like it's like that with that certain dish, you can see how it's a combination of the Pacific Island and Asian cultures and stuff like that. So, but however, one thing that a lot of people have argued, and this was also a discussion that came up on Twitter within the Polynesian community, was how it isn't fair that during Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month, is that they always have to group the two communities together. Like we know that there's a lot of stuff about the Asian American communities that there's for people to learn about. There's definitely a lot of stuff about the Pacific Island community for people to learn about. But it's just so much we can tell them is because we're grouped in this group. Like it'd be nice if there was an Asian American Heritage Month. There's a Pacific Island Month. So it'll give us more time and more space to show them what exactly is the Asian American community made up and what is the Pacific Island community made up. Because like Pacific Island is just not Hawaii and Samoa. Like there's Fiji, there's Tonga, there's Guam, there's all the Micronesian islands and stuff like that. But we don't have that opportunity and time to discuss that much because we're grouped in this Asian American and Pacific Island community. Something like that, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Risa.
And you can also sort of see it with like scholarship opportunities and stuff like that. A lot of the scholarships are Asian American and Pacific Island scholarships. And so like it's kind of tough for students when they come across stuff like that as well, because we're grouped in like that one group and we're specifically something else in terms of ethnicity.
If no one else has any questions, I'm going to make one more final announcement before we close today's event. But if you do have questions, again, as Risa mentioned, she's willing to accept those via email, or feel free to interrupt me as well. So, but today we're, for the next couple of days, we're celebrating Diwali at the Arc. So student organizations work really hard to decorate the center. So if you have a chance, please feel free to stop by today until 4, or tomorrow from 8 to 4, or Monday through Thursday. Today and tomorrow, several a student organization is providing free Diwali boxes with goodies in there. So if you like, feel free to stop by today until 4, or sorry, until 5, and also tomorrow as well. So I'll put all this information in the chat. But also, if you haven't had a chance to sign in yet, please do so, as we're providing $10 vouchers to Purdue Food Co. locations around campus. So if you'd like one, please sign up there so that way we can give it to you. So unfortunately, it's not digital, it is hard copies. So we ask that you please come and stop by the Arc to pick it up.
Or if you have a on-campus address, we would be happy to deliver that as well if you have an on-campus address.
Yeah, so that's it for my end, but thank you for everyone who's been participating in our Lunch and Learn. And if this is your first time, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you're able to join us for next semester's Lunch and Learn.
Thank you all. Risa, I hope you see all of the comments thanking you for the presentation on the chat.
Yes, I do. And thank you everyone for your time and attention. And thank you, Art, for having me.
Thank you, Risa. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.
Bye.